The Risen re-release for console, seemingly renamed Risen 1, is a reminder that Piranha Bytes excels at consistency. Irrespective of whether your first experience was 2001's Gothic or 2021's ELEX II, you'll be familiar with their long-running RPG template that has seen incremental improvements to mechanical depth, storytelling, and visuals over time. For some, Piranha Bytes means mechanically clunky, dated-looking, and outright anachronistic RPGs. For others, myself included, it means dense RPGs with competing factions, unexpected consequences to your actions, and a game world ripe with opportunities for exploitation. Piranha Bytes games tend to have underwhelming narratives, both as a function of the writing and the quest structure, and Risen is no exception. You play as a snarky but otherwise blank template of a hero, washed ashore on the island of Piranha, a castaway aboard an Inquisition vessel coming to investigate the mysterious storms around the island and ancient temples that have risen from the ground and begun spewing out monstrosities. Loyalties are now split between the former leader, Don Esteban, and his bandits camped out next to a large temple in the swamps, and Inquisitor Mendoza and his Order of the Holy Flame that claim Harbour Town and the Mage's Monastery next to a sacred volcano. Both of them are recruiting to plunder the temples for artifacts and gold, and mechanically, this presents an opportunity for the player to side with either of the factions. In practice, this choice feels most significant during the first chapter, when you can engage with 3 lengthy, often mutually exclusive faction quest lines, before you're ultimately forced to side with Don Esteban or the Order of the Holy Flame. By the end of the first chapter, you're forced into working with the Inquisitor and the Mages towards a greater purpose, and these faction quests start to feel underdeveloped. Your choices might influence who will attack you on sight initially, who will provide high-level services and training, or who might ambush you down the line if you scupper their plans, but they end up feeling like minor variations when many plot-focused quests will deal with neutral parties and play out much the same way. If you're after quality writing, a compelling narrative, and story permutations, Risen is not going to scratch that itch. But to its credit, it avoids simple good versus evil factions. Don Esteban offers freedom but rampant criminality, while Mendoza and the Order of the Holy Flame offer subservience but peace and order. Unfortunately, the lore feels underdeveloped. The writing is often more unintentionally funny than actually funny, and the characters are one-dimensional caricatures that you've seen before. It's also a game of its time, as I could count on one hand the number of women who are not generic NPCs, labelled wife, dancer, or prostitute. At this point, you might be wondering if the gameplay is Risen saving grace. Well, that depends on whether you're playing the game as intended or not. Risen is a messy RPG, in the sense you have to discover quest givers and objectives organically. The journal makes notes of important NPCs, but doesn't mark them on the map. It's also not uncommon to have no obvious forward trajectory until a half-dozen quests suddenly coalesce and resolve together. Very few of these quests deviate from the kill this or fetch that formula, but there are always multiple ways to complete any plot-essential quest, an essential design not only for role-playing, but also to avoid several bugs that persist 14 years since launch. Now, while I'd bet most gamers prefer a smooth difficulty curve, I've always felt Risen gets off to a great start. The island of Piranha is a dangerous place for new adventurers, and, if you're more familiar with North American developers, it feels closest designed to the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind. You're ridiculously weak at the start, outclassed by every creature and NPC on the island, with the prospect of decent equipment and improved attributes hours away. The island is relatively small by modern standards, but manages to feel large and interconnected, funneling you between larger regions and towns packed with named NPCs and quests, while side paths often lead to ruins with deadly creatures and some loot at the end. The questing structure typically forces you to complete dozens of shorter quests before progressing the main one, so it makes for a surprisingly dense world where every new area offers up an hour or two of questing, many of which involve seemingly insurmountable battles at first. You see, the difficulty is, in true Piranha Bytes fashion, region-based, wildly variable, and exacerbated by the clunky combat. Early on, it's wise to assume anything or anyone encountered off the beaten path, no matter how innocuous looking, can butcher you in a heartbeat. As a result, the opening hours feel more akin to a survival game than RPG. Think tense battles of attrition, won by burning through healing resources rather than mastering the combat mechanics. If you need to clear a cave of wolves, slay a wandering rotworm, or a troop of terrifying bogmen, well, get used to the idea of drawing them off one by one, assuming that's even possible, and watch them dodge, block, parry almost every attack, shredding chunks of your health bar with a single swipe, while you slowly chip away at theirs. Most enemies have names that hint at their toughness level, but it's not uncommon to stumble into an area and be unceremoniously one-shot. If you consider yourself a fan of challenging games and you're stubborn enough to persist, Risen has no shortage of brutal roadblocks, but it doesn't have to be that way. There are, of course, developer-intended ways to survive and progress. Stick to the quests pointed out by early NPCs, never stray off the main paths, skirt around the aggro range of creatures, pay, bribe, or complete trivial tasks to resolve quests, gain XP and gold this way for hours as you slowly skill and gear up. Once suitably powerful, a simple yet convoluted process that involves gaining XP towards levels and learning points, and then paying gold to trainers for attributed skill boosts, things get easier. Fighters can use force or intimidation to take what they want. Thieves can sneak past seemingly brain-dead AI, picking locked chests or pickpocketing NPCs using pleasingly straightforward mechanics. Meanwhile, mages have a range of offensive and support spells that allow them to mix and match their approach. That said, few wants to endure excessive hardship and spend hours grinding for XP and gold. There are 4 factors that make Risen such a flexible and exploitable experience. Firstly, Risen's world is pre-populated from the start and persistent, with very few things spawned in outside of major chapter events. Every creature that needs to be slain and every quest item that needs to be recovered exists in the world from the start, hidden in caves, chests, or maybe in NPC inventories. New NPC interactions might open up for later quests, but essential quest items remain in your inventory until needed. Dead NPCs remain dead, slain creatures remain slain, and looted chests remain looted. Secondly, NPCs and creatures are subject to the same rules as the player. They physically travel between locations, can fall to their deaths, die in combat with wildlife or other factions, and humans can be beaten up to loot without actually killing them. The third factor is that the AI is weirdly detailed. NPCs and creatures follow day-night cycles, they forage, they loot, and equip themselves, but it's also incredibly stupid at times. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, quest resolutions are just a set of conditions that need to be fulfilled. How you get to that point, or in what order, is entirely up to you. As someone with a compulsive urge to complete each area to its fullest before moving on, Risen's unforgiving difficulty and video game logic often frustrated me. Why was I being sent to kill packs of tough creatures by NPCs with quality gear and high-level skills that could handle them easily? Well, it turns out you can get them to handle it, thanks to hostile AI that simply beelines towards you, AI factions that'll really fight each other, and quest conditions that care nothing for the finer details. I spent most of the first and second chapters baiting creatures or faction members towards each other, sometimes the quest giver themselves, sitting back while they dealt with the threat, and then claiming that sweet gold and XP, risk-free, as a reward for my apparent success. Similarly, if a quest sends you into a dungeon ruin to recover an artifact or ancient armor piece, there's really any need to deal with the Guardians, making it viable to simply run past everything while chugging potions if needed. With access to powerful support spells or scrolls, this is an even easier approach for mages. During several of the largest faction battles with AI allies, I found running around as bait while the AI dished out damage to be the perfect approach. But even if you find yourself short on allies, most creatures can't climb and have no ranged attack, allowing you to cheese them from above with a bow, crossbow, or offensive spell, although you then have to deal with the absolutely rubbish aiming. If melee is your only option, you can always make use of the fact that most enemies can't dodge effectively when backed into a corner, or when clustered onto a narrow path. Now, there are, of course, downsides to these mechanics. If you can exploit them, so can the AI. As someone who gravitates towards stealth, lockpicking, and pickpocketing, which features some legitimately funny dialogue, I found many quests a little too simple to complete. But then any character can always beat down an NPC, or get someone else to do it for you, and then loot them before scampering away. The problem is I often stashed or sold items that would be later part of a collect X number of Y quest, while falling in battle could even see quest items looted off me. Thankfully, there's always a way to get back on track, even if it's not exactly the approach you intended. In wrapping up, it's worth quickly clarifying that this is just a simple PC to console port, sold at twice the price on current and last-gen hardware. Sure, it's a step up from the wonky Xbox 360 version, even running using backwards compatibility, and features higher resolutions, better performance, sharper textures, longer draw distance, and a much less twitchy camera. However, Risen was never an attractive game, and the years haven't been kind to its generic environments, clunky animations, and horrifying character models. Thankfully, it still has a great atmosphere, thanks to time of day shifts and weather changes, coupled with layered ambience and an eclectic soundtrack. The music remains a highlight with unique themes for each area, ranging from traditional high fantasy to frontier-style string pieces, and even epic orchestral pieces that share the same energy as some of the Bethesda-published Fallout games. That said, gameplay trumps visuals, and Risen can still feel wonderfully broken and fun to play around with. The sooner you shift your focus to exploiting the underlying mechanics, rather than playing it as a traditional RPG, the better it gets, but only for a while. Perhaps Risen's biggest flaw is that you eventually grow more powerful and acquire better gear, reducing that early tension and the need to exploit the wonky mechanics and AI to survive. By the end, it simply feels like a clunky, ugly, and middling RPG that was surpassed by many of its peers. As a result, recommending Risen 1 in 2023 is tough, and it's more a case of preaching to the choir. As with all Piranha Bytes games, it's a niche and acquired taste that caters to the same audience year after year, probably a dwindling audience as it grows older. I know many fans praise Risen as the closest you'll get to Gothic with an intuitive control scheme, but if you're still curious about the developer, I'd rather direct you to ELEX and its sequel, as they share a similar template but feel slightly less anachronistic and hold up better in the long run. If you've got this far, please consider giving the video a like and maybe subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow.